Welcome to another true scary story. On what started as just another normal day, Griselda's experiences with the paranormal began. One terrifying event forced her out of her house, and from then on, she found herself encountering the unexplainable. Time and time again, Griselda's encounters proved that she had an unusual ability. She could see those who had passed on with frightening accuracy. Here is Vicenda's chilling story. The tale begins 29 years ago, when I was just a 10-year-old attending school in Chicago. After school, I'd ride the bus from Chicago all the way to Cicero, a journey that often made my day longer and my nights even more uneasy. My house stood about a mile from the bus stop, a brick bungalow with 2 bedrooms, concrete stairs, and an eeriness that seemed to lurk in its shadows. Walking into the house, the main rooms were on the right. The dining room, with its dusty window and a paint-chipped swinging door that led into the kitchen. On the left, my grandmother's room beckoned with its faint smell of old roses. The dining room held my mother's room, and through the kitchen, a bathroom, a pantry, and an enclosed indoor patio awaited. 2 doors led out, one to the basement and the other to the attic. The attic, untouched and unfinished, was the kind that nightmares loved to call home. Only a single light bulb fought the darkness, flickering against the shadows. Nobody dared venture up there except to store boxes forgotten by time. The basement was another story entirely. At the end of the stairs lay the door to the backyard, and the first 2/3 of the basement was your typical laundry room. An old-style counter for folding clothes stood guard against a wooden barn door that looked like it had been plucked from a horror movie. Behind it was an outhouse-like area with an upgraded but disgusting toilet. The walls were black, looking like mold but somehow not, and an old mirror reflected your fears back at you. If you ventured further, you'd find the water heater, and then a door that led to the last third of the house, a makeshift apartment. The ceiling was so low I could touch it just by raising my hand. It was cramped, with a tiny bedroom on the right and 2 closets standing like silent sentinels outside the room. The backyard was pebbled and boasted a creepy, decrepit 1-car garage that always seemed to whisper secrets to the wind. Every day, the bus would drop me off around 5 p.m. I'd walk that mile home where my little sister, Debbie, and my grandmother would be waiting. On this particular day, as I entered the backyard and approached the house, I called out, "I'm here, Debbie," expecting to hear my sister's playful giggle or my grandmother's warm greeting. Instead, I was met with silence. I heard the kitchen sink running, dishes clattering as though being washed. Assuming my grandmother was busy cooking, I made my way up the stairs. But as I peered into the kitchen, there was nobody there. The sound of water stopped abruptly. Puzzled, I checked the bathroom, but it was empty. I searched each room in the house, my calls for Debbie growing more urgent. Silence was my only reply. Maybe they're downstairs, I thought, heading to the basement. The stairs creaked under my weight, echoing in the eerie stillness. Halfway down, I heard the back door open. The unmistakable sound of footsteps, light, like a little girl's, accompanied by laughter echoed up the stairs. "Debbie? Is that you?" Relief washed over me as I ran back upstairs, hoping to catch them. But as I climbed, the kitchen noises resumed. The dishes clattered, the water ran, yet once again the kitchen was empty. Fear gripped me. I dashed outside, unable to shake the unsettling feeling that something was very wrong. I sat in the alley, trying to calm myself. Minutes later, I spotted my grandmother and sister walking down the alley, grocery bags in hand. "What are you doing outside?" my grandmother asked, her voice tinged with concern. "There's something in the house," I stammered. "No one's there. I'm scared." That day marked the beginning of my encounters with the paranormal. I was only 10, but I had no doubt that this was just the start. My grandmother lived with us from the time I was 7 until I was 17, and throughout those years our home was a hot spot for strange occurrences. We even had to call a priest at one point, but the disturbances only stopped after my grandmother passed away. To this day, I still experience these unexplainable phenomena, though not as intensely. Sometimes I find myself telling these entities to leave, to get out of my house. It's as if my grandmother's presence lingered, bringing with it an unending parade of spirits. My mother practiced Santeria, with its rituals of sacrifice and cleansing, and my grandmother read palms, sharing books on the occult. Our house was steeped in the supernatural. I once dreamed that my grandmother was in trouble, waking with a sense of urgency. I called my mother, insisting she check on her. 2 days later, my grandmother passed away. Strangely, her death fell on June 3rd, the same date my daughter was born 2 years later. A connection beyond the grave, a cycle of life and death intertwined. Years later, during a Thanksgiving holiday in a different house, my cousins and I gathered in the attic. Someone brought a Ouija board, and curiosity got the better of us. As we played, the planchette began to move on its own. My cousins grew bored and left, but my sister and I stayed behind. We asked questions, and the board answered, claiming to be a girl. I was unnerved and threw the board into the closet. That night, I woke up at 3 a.m., feeling a presence watching me from the closet. Terrified, I ran to my mother's room, seeking solace. "Go back to sleep," she said, brushing off my fear. But I knew what I had felt. And the next night, I woke up again at 3 a.m., this time with 3 scratches burning on my leg. Panic gripped me as I showed my mother, who dismissed my fears as imagined. When it happened a third time, my mother finally acknowledged that something was wrong. She arranged for a priest to come and bless the house. The priest arrived unexpectedly, performing a ritual throughout the house. As we held hands and prayed, the door to the attic slammed open and shut on its own. My mother and I exchanged knowing glances, the priest's presence a silent acknowledgement of the haunting. After the blessing, the house felt different. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by the sweet smell of roses. A sign, I later learned, that a spirit had been banished. Our first house had a long history, built in 1931 in an area once known as the Capone Belt. I often saw a man in a hat, dressed like a gangster from a bygone era. He never frightened me, though, watching over us silently. I stopped seeing him after my grandmother passed. Throughout my life, I've seen shadowy figures, felt presences, and sensed the spirits of those who have passed. Whether it was my child's great-grandmother wanting to meet her great-granddaughter, or the lingering spirits of my husband's grandparents, I have experienced more than I can explain. Even today, I sometimes wake with a feeling, an urge to tell someone to check on a loved one. More often than not, something does happen. It's a gift and a curse, a connection to a world unseen. Yet I cannot help but wonder what will come next. What shadows linger beyond the veil, waiting for the chance to reveal themselves?